Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Blackbar podcast. I am Caleb Weidman. I'm here with Zach and Nick. How you guys doing today?
We're just jamming to the song right now.
We're just vibing right now. I'm getting a little sick, and I may or may not be on medication, and I'm just vibing.
Wait, what does that mean? You may or may not be on medication.
It means whatever you want it to mean. Last week I had vampire teeth, and this week I have a stuffy face. So I guess
you're paying for it.
I'm paying for it.
For your
I'm being punished for my vampirism.
Yes.
I mean, what are you gonna do?
So this week is a little bit different. This week is actually pre-recorded because Nick and I, by the time you're watching this, will be at SALT conference doing a handful of things there. So we had to pre-record this week's episode. So feel free to comment though and interact. We will have Zach as a live host down in there as the video is premiering. Should you want to participate in that?
I'm going to be the best dang live host you've ever seen. And by that, I mean, we'll see how it goes.
Yeah. If you want to join the conversation further past that, you can always join our Discord, where we'll be having plenty of conversations about everything discussed in this podcast and everything beyond that in the world of church media. And also, if you need any help in the world of church media productions, whether that be graphic design, video production, animation, web design, SEO, anything in between, be sure to visit blk.bar and we'll see if we can help you. But today, we don't have just 3 people here today. We actually have 4 people here today. As our good friend, Alex Lyons is in the house to talk with us about a handful of topics we have going on today. Alex, how you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm just vibing with y'all with the music as well. But the track, went out, so I can't vibe anymore. It's all
Yep.
You can just vibe to the music that's always playing.
Yeah, there's always music playing in my head. Believe me.
Oh man.
Oh boy. Well, Alex, thanks for being with us today. Excited for you. Caleb, did we talk about who the heck Alex is? Is that something we covered yet? We should probably intro our
Alex
guest.
is just this random guy that we found on the street.
We found him on the street. We hooked him up with a full technical production setup and then told him to come on the podcast. So guys, so that you guys have a context, Alex, we've talked about him in the past. Oh, wink, wink. But Alex is currently the creative director at Southern Carolina Baptist, or SC Baptist. He is a father of 4, and then he's also my former boss and overlord. So whenever I interned in the Philippines, he was the one that kept me in line. So
made him eat balut, which if you don't know what balut is, if you're squeamish, don't look it up. Don't look it up.
It's like an egg, but a little more form.
That's right.
It's with feathers and the whole deal. Yep. I told him I would not.
Between an egg and a chicken.
Yep.
Yeah.
Correct.
It was an experience.
I think know what it is.
In the Philippines, I got to try so many things. I got to try balut, and I think chicken's feet and shark fin and jellyfish.
Yep.
I mean, they gave me the whole experience.
Did you enjoy it, Zach? Did you have a...
Which of those? Balut specifically?
Or being with me? I'm sure he enjoyed the balut more than being with me. I think that's probably
Alex,
what happened.
3 out of 10. Balut, 2 out of 10. So,
but with rice, how much out of 10 is the question?
Balut wasn't too bad. It was like a hard-boiled egg. It was all psychological. Because the first one I got through, and the second one I was like, I'll do another one. And then I threw it in my mouth, and I was just like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, the 65-year-old Filipino man gave it to him, and I told Zach, you are not passing your internship if you don't eat this thing right now, because he will be offended for life. So
shout out
sorry
to
about that,
Mangabe.
boss. Mangabe in the house.
Thank you so much, Mangabe. Well, guys, let's go ahead. You don't need to hear about my extensive internship experience. Let's go ahead and get to our first topic today. We have been watching something unfold. I don't know if any of you guys know what Eddie Bauer is. Does anyone?
I feel like Caleb would know.
I am very familiar with Eddie Bauer. They're not for me, but they're they make clothes for outdoorsy people, for people who go outside. That is not me.
I feel like this would be like
touch grass.
This is a nice Venn diagram of like Caleb's fashion world and my desire to go outside.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, Go to Eddie Bauer then. You might they're a little expensive, but yeah.
Yeah, I'm a 42-year-old male, and so as a Gen Xer, I don't have my New Balances yet, but I'm a little bit familiar with who Eddie Bauer is. Yeah,
right.
So Eddie Bauer, they have always been. I mean, they've been around for a good while. They were established in 1920, and the founder, Eddie Bauer, was actually the first to patent a down jacket in the U.S., which is pretty cool. And in 1936, he happened to use stuffed goose feathers, which is relevant, I swear. Just recently, Eddie Bauer rebranded. They were previously kind of like a handwritten script custom font, and they rebranded to a very simple, very bold sans serif font with a goose, like a goose icon. And there's been a mixed review on how it's been received. About a year ago, Tim Bantle joined Eddie Bauer as the CEO after a variety of internal conversations, speaking with employees and researching the company's history. He announced a new three-pronged approach to expand Eddie Bauer's efforts, which is essentially a Caleb, what's it called? I mean, the thing that you guys have been talking about forever that we still haven't talked about, doing like a survey to.
Oh, you mean a focus group?
Yeah, focus.
You're talking about focus group.
That's essentially
the thing, Caleb, the thing, Caleb.
Caleb.
Yes.
Come on, read my mind.
Trying to understand.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. This is sick brain thinking that I already communicated this with you. So,
are we talking about Destiny right now?
Telepathic right now.
This is me. Anyway, he did the research, he connected with the people in the company, and he announced a three-pronged approach to expanding Eddie Bauer's efforts, and that's focusing more on wholesale retail, increasing internal distribution, and then finally reaching a new generation of customers. And I think it's essentially that third element that really helped them realize that they needed to rebrand. Not only because, I think bold sans serif, simple iconography is big right now, and in general, but also, and this is interesting in the article I was reading, a lot of younger generations don't know how to read cursive. Which sounds crazy to say, but the handwritten font was like a handwritten cursive, and they decided to rebrand, and that's where we are, guys. It's interesting to watch a brand as big as them do something like this, because not only did they put in the work, but they also tried to make something extremely simple, and they're fully rebranding all of their stores with this new simplified look. Now, the nice thing is that the goose being, the down feather thing, right? That was kind of the connection. The goose has always been kind of a prominent symbolism within the company over all these years. So they just kind of leaned into it. So I'm curious, especially as we've talked about rebranding before and making like a clear brand for your organization, for your church, for your ministry. I'm curious what you guys think about this new idea. Was it a stupid move to make a change on that? Or does this seem to be pretty solid direction that they're taking?
Yeah, man, I feel like there's two ways you can look at that, right? Like, I don't know. I've heard a lot of criticism about minimalism becoming a way to remove personality from stuff. But you got to communicate in the language that your audience knows, right? Alex, I heard you chime in there. What were you saying?
I was just going to say Johnson & Johnson recently, since 1880 something, they went from a script into a sans serif and just going with J&J, versus just, Johnson & Johnson. So same thing, taking out a script to be able to, communicate with that, the clean sans serif. But I think what's interesting more to me is that, explicitly the Eddie Bauer guy talks about how, Gen Z can't read cursive, and that's why they did it. So, is Coca-Cola next? I mean, honestly, they're a good script for 100 years. So
I'm drinking this dark liquid, but I don't know what it's called.
These legacy brands, for sure. These legacy brands trying to figure out in, things like McDonald's or Coca-Cola that have just per se stood the test of time, that they have no there's just no fixation on that, to Gen Z per se in that. So trying to, be, hey, fellow kids, with them, but simultaneously trying to, communicate who they are. So I think, as a kid, as somebody who has for kids. Like my kid is 8 and she can't read cursive, and so I mean, there's some reality to that. But I don't know. Time will tell, I guess. What do you got? What about you? What do you guys think?
I have lots of thoughts on this.
Of course.
But wait, first I just want to see an Eddie Bauer rep replicating the "Hello, fellow teenagers" meme, wearing like this down jacket and those big like rubber
puffy coat.
boots.
It has to be a puffy coat in light of everything. Puffy coat.
I feel like that'd be a really self-aware ad if they did that. That'd be great.
So I actually personally think that this is a terrible rebrand. However, for none of the reasons we've talked about. That being said, specifically regarding to the things we've talked about, I'll bring the logo back up. I do think, yes, can Gen Z read cursive as well as previous generations and then the previous generation? Yeah, probably not. I remember going to like Lord and Taylor when I was a kid, and me and my sister called it the Squiggle Store because not only was it cursive, it was like sort of fancy, like it wasn't incredibly clear cursive. Lord and Taylor logo. It was more stylized cursive.
I never went to Lord and Taylor till I was in like college, so the fact that you guys were going as a kid, I'm just oh my gosh.
I mean,
you gotta forgive someone in grade school for not being able to read this, right? We just called it the Squiggle Store.
That's absolutely
but so the Eddie Bauer logo, obviously it is a cursive. I think a middle ground could have been making it a slightly more legible cursive. I do. It's not quite as bad as Lord and Taylor. I feel like they maybe could have just there are certainly more legible cursive logos. The original Instagram logo is something that comes to mind in this sort of situation. I do think there is an extra sensitivity in the fashion world to this sort of like oversimplification of the logo. I had briefly clicked on this before.
Yeah, I was going to say it's the first thing I thought of
for a good while. And now, to be clear, Eddie Bauer is not high fashion. They're like, upper middle class fashion. We're not talking about any of these brands here. But there was a trend for a very good long time that Burberry is actually just starting to kick over the past 6 months or so, of like taking your very stylized, fancy logo and then just mostly writing it in Helvetica or Gotham. And the idea was it's Helvetica is the new timeless, right? It's something that it effectively was built to have no personality. Therefore, no matter what you put it on, it doesn't clash more or less, right? Where there are some pieces where like that Yves Saint Laurent logo at the very top there, like it does have a lot of personality, and therefore it also can clash with some of the stuff that's going on.
Yeah.
So I believe in the world of fashion, at least, there's an extra sensitivity because people really have been over this sort of like direction in the sans serif of like everything is just getting simplified to the point of it's all feeling the same. That being said, that's not why I think it's a terrible rebrand. It's a terrible rebrand because Eddie Bauer is not the only person in the like a little bit more expensive outerwear, outdoorsy sort of feel. Obviously, there's brands like North Face, but one of the largest competitors in the field, probably one of the most well-known ones, especially if you start spending a little bit more money, is a company called Canada Goose.
What?
Right?
I don't think I've ever heard of this company before. Canada Goose.
But it's Goose too.
Canada Goose is like, they're like the high end. Like if you're ready to spend $800 to $1,000 on a jacket, this is the thing that you're spending your money on. I don't have $800 to $1,000 to spend a jacket, and if I wasn't going to spend it on Canada Goose. It'll be a couple other companies, but the Goose.
It looks like I have to drive to Vancouver in order to access the Canada Goose brand.
They've got stuff. They've got stuff in the States. I could promise you there. But
yeah, man, you just come to Michigan. We're close enough.
The spaces that they're in are already so close, and I recognize that there is a bit of heritage involved with the Goose logo that they have going on here. But for the sake of like trying to identify yourself in the very specific small fashion world that you inhabit, which is outdoorsy thing, I feel like that was a bad move. I feel like they already have the Goose thing. Canada Goose is like, at least in that world, very well known, very popular. I think it was a bad move. I don't think it has anything to do with the script necessarily. I think if they went to their focus groups and they, interviewed a bunch of Gen Z kids, or I guess some of them are adults now, and said, "Hey, can you read this? Like, is this connecting with you?" and they say no, then that was absolutely the right move to try to simplify and clean up the logo, because the logo doesn't belong to them. It doesn't belong to the old heads who already are wearing the clothes. They're making it to bring in more customers. So they're going to make a logo that speaks to those customers. And if you're upset by that, I don't know what to tell you. They're a business. They're trying to make money.
Yeah.
I have a problem with the goose. I think that will lead to more confusion, and I don't think there'll necessarily be like a lawsuit over this sort of thing at all or anything like that.
Yeah.
But I think it was a bad move in that regard, personally.
Sure.
Interesting. Oh, looks
Alex,
like
you're
Alex
muted.
might be muted there.
What is that white blob and that Canada goose that's happened? Like, what is that? I don't even know what that is.
Is that Canada?
I don't think it's all of Canada.
listen.
Canada drawn by Americans.
I'm so sorry. We have quite a few Canadian individuals in our Discord, and I can hear them all yelling at me right now. I'm so sorry.
Supposedly, that is the landmass of the Arctic. That is
okay.
like the North
very
Pole,
cool.
whatever.
I like
Okay.
that.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Canada. Their jackets are like they're like really, really expensive ones are extremely heavy, like people who climb Mount Everest sort of thing.
Awesome.
This
cool.
is going to be the kind of thing that they're wearing.
That's cool.
Interesting.
Nice.
So, guys, I guess what I'm trying to connect here is I really appreciate those different perspectives. I think the logo isn't necessarily bad. It's clean, it's simple, but I understand what you're saying, Caleb. So I'm trying to like rein it in for us, especially for someone like you, Alex, who has a lot of connection and relationships with a wide variety and range of churches in both scale and age. Like, what can we learn from a rebrand like this? Like, because I think in concept, what they did, the process by why they got to where they are is decent. They researched their history. They assessed the demographic that they're trying to target. But then maybe, Caleb, you're saying that they should have been more aware of the general market that they're competing with. So what can churches, ministries, organizations within our spheres learn from this process? What do you guys think?
Yeah, I mean, there's how many different Calvary churches are there, or First?
Quite a
I mean,
few.
First Baptist, First
churches?
Assemblies, Life Church,
Yep.
Life, upwards, inwards, outwards, to the left, song churches.
Yeah, so I mean, like there is some commonality that you'll need to differentiate, but that name is going to be different. You know, we here at the Baptist Convention, you know, we have 2,000 plus churches, and how many First Baptist City X there are, you know, that are just known as First Baptist. But then when you get together, you're like, which First Baptist? You know, so I think that there is some things to learn from that. How can you differentiate yourself to something that is in a similar market, and being able to understand how you can communicate with the audience that you're trying to reach, or the audience that you're hoping to reach. You know, they're maybe not getting as much return on Gen Z as Gen Z is transitioning from having disposable incomes, maybe starting to be in that middle class, being able to see that and have an opportunity to reach that new audience, creating that. So I think that a church can learn that I think in all these legacy brands that are like, you know, Johnson & Johnson and Eddie Bauer, that have these like long logo history, and then they change it up. If you're changing it up for a reason to try to signal what you're trying to do in the future, I think that's one thing. If you're trying to just change it up because the kids can't read cursive, I mean, that's maybe something different. So I guess just the why are you choosing to change something up? Because you need to have Baby's New or Meta Pro or whatever, and enter, you know, whatever Google font you're going to be doing in the moment, or with a nice fluid gradient background, because that's like what everybody else is doing, or you're trying to do it for a specific reason. So not just changing to change, but change for a purpose to reach the audience that you not either have, or the audiences that you want. That's what we talk about to our churches and to our ministries. Like, who are you currently reaching? But like, who would you like to reach? Like, are you satisfied with that? And, you know, if we're going to see, you know, we on this shirt, we have each church, every life, each church can, every life counts. And if we really believe that each church can, there's an individuality to that, but there's also understanding that every life is going to be different and how people approach that. So these, we're the oldest convention, and we have churches that are literally 200 years old. Some churches that are older than the country itself. And so thus, as they're rebranding, they have to understand the history that that was there, but still communicate with a modern audience. So it's much like the Johnson & Johnson Eddie Bauer, where you're trying to still cultivate that brand that has been built on before and go into the future. So
yeah, I love that.
Man, I feel there's so much there too that like I'm even reminded of like the video, Caleb, that we did way back about logos and how is the cross the right logo for the church. I even think we talked about Saint Laurent in that video. But Alex, I love the point you make there, because there are a lot of facets to look at before you redesign, and one of those that I think is really important is your current logo. And this is something we talked about in that video. You don't need to necessarily rebrand if your logo is saying the things that it needs to. If you're changing your logo just to chase a trend, like you're probably creating more work than you need to. And I my forte is not necessarily graphic design, but I do feel a little bit of hesitation and worry with all these other brands changing the way they have just to fit this trend that seems to be going on, and how they all feel the same. And I think, to your point, even about how like First Baptist, First Assembly, that could become a even greater problem within the church world if all of a sudden all our logos look the same, which they might already, but like stylistically now they even look the same, and they're even named the same. Like, what is differentiating us building to building at that point?
I don't want to open like a can of worms, because I know we have a larger conversation to get into, but I am curious in the context, Caleb, that you're pitching this Eddie Bauer logo against this other Canadian company that's in the same kind of market. You're saying the difficulty of this rebrand is that there's competition, and you're going to have to worry about that. Maybe Caleb, I know you've done several rebrands now. What do you think that same mentality should be for churches? Because I don't want to be like, so we always say the evil marketing lizard brain. At the end of the day, churches are effectively, if you're on the same community, you're on the same city, you're effectively either fully partner with one another, which is, I think, more rare, or you're essentially competing for the same demographic, the same market. And while you have those churches having individual people that they should be focused on, which we've talked extensively about, what is the mentality that we should have as Christian media creators and churches? And we're kind of in competition with one another, but how do we navigate that without being just this person that's like, I'm gonna dominate this city and I will rebrand to make it so? Like anyone can feedback, but I'm curious what you think about that.
Sure.
Yeah, I think I'm always extremely hesitant to use the word competition when we're talking about churches.
Yeah, right.
I think that
don't skewer me for using competition. No. I was using it for a little.
No.
And anyway.
I think that every church in existence should be working to meet needs that aren't currently being met. And if they're not currently being met, that means that churches aren't doing that. You should be going after people that are currently yet not being going after, right? And I know, like, even the church that I grew up in, there was a church immediately across the street. I went to Assemblies of God Pentecostal church, and the church across the street was it was a Catholic church, right? Were we in competition with each other? I don't, like, those are two very different kinds of people that are going to go to one or the other church, right? We might be pulling from the same group of people geographically, but I wouldn't say demographically. That being said, there are environments, even when I think back at Grand Rapids First, you could go down the street for 3 miles and pass 6 or 7 churches in that area. There's just a ton of them, big churches, small churches, all sorts of different demographics. And I know even there's a logo that I'm a rebrand project I'm working on right now for a church where we had all the conversations of who's your audience and what do you want them to feel and what sets you apart, yada yada. And then one of the questions I asked towards the end is, are there any other churches in your area that do a lot of the same things that you do? and they came up with 3 or 4 of them, and we noticed a trend. Every single one of those had green logos, which is like that's interesting. I mean, 80% of churches are either blue or green, and then the spicy ones are orange, right? So
spicy ones.
Yeah. We've got personality here. That's what they're trying to say. So all of a sudden, like, we were already starting to talk about colors. Green, I just crossed it straight off the list. Like, you need to figure out a way to set yourself apart visually.
Oh yeah.
In the same way that you're going to try to set yourself apart with like the actual ministry and you know, your personality as a company. I do think something that so I think everything you guys said in regards to making sure that you're speaking to your audience is true. I think making sure that you're differentiating yourself from other people in your field is also good. I also think that this is sort of me personally, and to be clear, I am not I am not in the target demo of audio, right? So like, this stuff doesn't speak to me personally, and that's okay. But if Eddie Bauer actually wants to hit Gen Z people, and even going past that into Gen Alpha, the logo is one of the last things I would worry about changing. It would probably be the product first, because I mean, like, the sort of like wintry wear, like that's something everybody's going to need. It's not, well, it might be getting warmer we're not going to talk about that for the future generation. But the actual fashion, like the cut and the style and all that kind of, like, does Eddie Bauer need like to start putting out lines every few months with like more fashion forward pieces? I would say, yeah. Like, if they're actually trying to go for that market, the logo and the brand, sure, it can communicate an intention, but if the product isn't actually delivering for that demographic, you could have the catchiest logo in the world. They're still not going to buy the product, right? And in the same way, like, if you have a church that's 200 years old and it all of a sudden the average age of the church is 60 and 70, and you think, oh, like, let's spend $10,000 on a logo rebrand. We don't charge $10,000, and we're gonna get like the coolest, trendiest thing out there, and you change nothing about your service, it will not move the needle a single inch. It needs to be a communication of what your logo in general is. A communication. It's saying what you can about what is inside the box. And if they buy the product based on the box and open it up and something entirely different is there, they're going to return it, and they're never going to buy from you again. You can only lie once.
That's why I don't. That's why I don't like that churches overall and ministries overall put branding and visual identity as synonyms when they're not. The brand is who you are. Like, and a logo typeface color is going to visually represent who you are. So a brand is, so to your point, if you want to change your brand, change the things that reflect your brand, which are your products, your marketing strategy, your messaging, and what color or typeface you use as downline, because that is what visually represents those values downline of what you're trying to change. So if you have the same product and just slap a new Helvetica period, on it, then you're good. Then you're like, it's the same thing, just with a fresh coat of paint. So I think that's the biggest thing sometimes that I really try to drive home to our churches is that the brand is who you are, your messaging, all of that stuff. But the visual identity is your logo and colors, and that should come after you understand. And if you know who they are, we're in the process of that right now. If I gave you all the logos that represented the South Carolina Baptist Convention, you would see a NASCAR, really. And so we're trying to become a branded house versus a house of brands, and we're doing that by deleting. So it's gonna look maybe more of that corporate minimalism, but it's a minimalism purposeful, because we want everything we do to be representative of the South Carolina Baptist Convention. If you go to this summer camp or go to this program or go to this event you may identify with that event, with that audience, but it never comes back to us, then we've created like this like little siloed community, which is great to have people who are like-minded in that community, but it never goes back to the larger goal of like, we are a collective and a cooperative of churches that, are one family kind of going towards one mission together through one cooperative effort. So that's kind of where that's kind of my pet peeve, that branding and visual identity are kind of like synonyms when they're not, kind of a thing. So
you're right on the money there. Yeah. Right on the money.
Wow.
Awesome.
I feel like we can keep talking about this, but we do have another conversation as well. I love that. Thank you guys for sharing. And as always, if you have questions, keep us posted, guys. Follow those brands. There's a lot we can learn from just observing how other people are doing things, which is awesome. So we'll head into kind of our main conversation here. Alex, we connected with him a bit back, and we've been talking a lot about AI, and if you've been watching any of our videos, AI comes up very often because it's so relevant and prevalent to our field at the moment.
Yeah.
But the kicker is, and I understand it, I respect it, I think we all do, is that there's a lot of thoughts about the fear of what it could do for us and how it could impact us. But Alex has got a little bit of a thought that'll kind of kick off our main topic today. So Alex, go ahead and take it away.
Yeah, for sure. So one of my favorite web series that I watch is called Everything is a Remix. Yes, Blackbar on YouTube. YouTube.com/BLKBAR.BAR. Hey, there it is. Shout out. There it is. YouTube.com/SC Baptist. There you go. But anyways, and he Kirby Ferguson, he's Canadian, so shout out to our Canadian viewers. And he talks about the
today.
Hey, we got the red in the background, so we're on. So his thesis is that all creativity is literally copying, transforming, and combining. Like when we learn how to make anything from the time we're a kid, we copy from imitating our parents to literally sitting in the class and looking at the teacher and copying. Like that is how we learn, right? The famous quote is that, Steve Jobs says, great artists copy, good artists copy, great artists steal. And he stole that quote from Pablo Picasso. So like he is even in that statement doing the copying, right? Transformative, taking something that already exists and making a slight subtle variation and then making it new. I know there's some gamers on this call, Alexei Pajinov from who made Tetris, in Soviet Russia in the 80s. He played a game called Petramino. Where these 5-piece sets of blocks that kind of came together, he deleted one of the pieces because it would create less pieces to make tetraminos, which became Tetris. And so he just made that subtle transformation to make Tetris. So he copied it and transformed it to make this new things. And then, combining things that already exist. So like, as church communicators, like, you've probably heard me nerd out a lot about Gutenberg, but as Gutenberg being like this great inventor, but Gutenberg combined elements of the hydraulic press, of movable type, and of ink that already existed. So he combined those into this new thing called the printing press. So when humans do it, we are okay with it. When machines start to copy, copy has this bad rap, or when they're transforming something, generative AI, they're transforming something into something new, or combining these things that already exist, that, kind of becomes that's kind of where the fallout starts to happen, and the creating of fear is nothing new. Like, right. Like storytellers have for centuries have used this technology into the hands of people. Think about Prometheus, right? He stole he stole fire from Zeus, and then the whole liver thing every day for the rest. He stole that power, and then Frankenstein's monster, which is actually subtitled as the modern Prometheus. He in his hubris wanted to create something alive, and then we transform to HAL 9000 and Terminator, and the list goes on and on. We all all it wrapped in that is the desire to make something or to get something, and there's that fear that kind of goes into that. Right now, we're we're fearful of like that our jobs are going to be eliminated, that we're going to have a loss of livelihood, that there's new ideas and systems that's coming that, all the deep fake stuff. We can talk about that in a second. But when I think about that, I think of what is the verse and what is the phrase that is in the Bible more than anything else. And it's that phrase of do not fear. You want to look at something freaky, look what an angel actually like looks like, bro. It's not like the little halo and wings and all that nice little with a little harp, bro. It's like, of course they would say do not fear because like, that's what I would do. Right. And so I just feel like that's interesting that like, we're fearful. We're trying to create, we have hubris to make something ourselves and we're okay with that. But when a machine does it, it starts to get into this, oh, no. But if everything is the remix, if there's nothing that is a new idea, there's nothing new under the sun, then nothing is thing. We have all emulating our creator who has created everything. So thus we ourselves haven't created anything. We've just transformed, copied, or combined it. And so that's kind of the kind of the light bulb moment for me that just like that in all of this, that we're okay it's okay when we do it. But it's not okay when machines are doing it. And then just how deep down the rabbit hole you want to go with share and auto tune or all these do you cite Photoshop when you use that? Is that real? Like it's just a slippery slope of all this. Where if you remember that the Lord has said, "Do not be afraid," and therefore I have made all things new, and the true author of creativity is the Creator. Then you haven't created anything. You are just emulating the creator in that. And I think that that's going to be hit a touch point because the hubris and the pride that's attached for like, no, I made this. Like I'm a guy who like wants to will things into existence. And like, here's this thing I made, but I didn't make that. I saw this thing, and I saw this church do this thing. And I was scrolling Instagram at 2 a.m. and I saw this idea, and then I put it all in my head and I made it into a new thing. Like that's how the AI is just doing it a bazillion times faster. So I guess that's just where I start to get into that fear being a driver of why churches have such a resistance to that. Alexander Graham Bell, he tried to give a patent of some kind of film projector to his church. They rejected him. Like it's just the church is like the church's hubris, if you will, sometimes in their reaction to technology, because they feel like it's them trying to replace God versus using it as a tool for God. Be it the dude from Life Church that created Bobby Goodenwald, who created Bible app, or Billy Graham, who's a great preacher, but he used technology. So I don't know. I just feel like all that is like that, the ethics of AI start to get into that. It just the core of everybody's kickback is fear. And if we look scripturally, the Lord says for us, do not be afraid, for behold, I have made all things new. And that encompasses it all. Do not be afraid, behold, because I have made all things new. So that's kind of my point, man, of where I'm kind of been working through right now about.
Brought Alex on to preach.
I'm sorry. We're still getting a little Baptist.
Don't apologize. This is great.
I think a good chunk of what you were talking about towards the beginning, it definitely lines straight up with something we've talked about a lot. I know it's been like a personal thing for me for a long time, which is there's no such thing as an original idea. That every idea is a combination of the things that you've experienced and taken in over the course of your life, and you're just mixing it together, hopefully in a new way, in an interesting way, and a non-derivative way, like we talked about last week. I think the easiest example to think of that I've used a handful of times is when you think about mythical animals in general, whether that be a unicorn or I don't know, Pikachu, you will have a very hard time thinking of one that isn't sort of just like an animal that already exists, but and then something on top of that, right?
Right.
Like, because it's impossible for us to come up with the idea of something. Even we like maybe there's aliens out there. What do they look like? I don't know, us but green, and they have bigger eyes, right? It's always just things that exist and tweaked, because I don't believe we have the ability to have a complete. That was God's job. We've just been remixing it from the entire time. I do think there's a question worth asking, though, is like, yes, I do believe we've all been copying and sort of twisting around and whatever. Is there an unethical way of doing that as a person? Is there an unethical way to copy? Right.
I mean, immediately I'd say that, like, you know, if you're doing a 1-to-1 copy, right, there's no transformative thing in there, and then you say, this is mine, right? We would call that plagiarism. We would call that, you know, like a counterfeit, right?
Right. Yeah. So if you like literally just stole something off the shelf and said, I made this, I think we would agree. If like, let's say, you know, so like Banksy is a relatively famous artist that everybody's probably would be familiar with his art style, whoever he is. Apparently,
I heard they found out
who he is.
Yeah, they found out who he was now. Apparently.
Mr. Brainwash, that's who he is. Anyways,
like, you know, if Nick, you decided to become like an expert Banksy replicator, and like you're making making the stuff, but you have managed to come up with effectively forgeries of Banksy that are like 100%, like nobody can tell the difference, and then you start selling them. Are we cool with that?
Only if we call it Nixie. That's what I from Banksy to Nixie. That's what I would want to hear.
I think that's where like copyright law, like I tell my wife all the time, like if I had another career, I would love to be an intellectual property attorney, because I just find that whole world fascinating, that somebody can like own an idea. Did Banks, because I would say no, because Banksy probably looked like he's a spray paint artist. Like he was obviously inspired by some spray paint artist before him. And so thus that's just where I think it starts to just all get broken down, you know, like, well, automation, it's the pace, it's the automation, you know, that they're doing, you know, they're replacing whatever, you know, drum machines for a hip hop artist in the 60s would feel like science fiction to them. Like, you know, I can sample anything and just hit a button and like go back and forth and whatever. Like that's crazy. And so like hip hop is such a, you know, form of that, because they're making transformative derivative works. But what I find interesting is that if you ask any hip hop head, tell me like a cover of a hip hop, and the only song that I can think of is Snoop Dogg's Lottie Dottie, coming off of Slick Rick's Lottie Dottie, and other than that, what I'm saying is that that every work of hip hop is transformative, and it's not just a regurgitation of what's happened before it. And so to me, there's always to be some kind of little work. So if Nick is making his own Banksy copies, there's still some kind of, you know, like difference in the material that you use, or maybe the paint that you use, something like that. So I just think that what is the difference between transformative work and derivative work and fair use, and how all that is going down, you know, like, you know, thankfully the Ed Sheeran case landed where it was, where we can't copyright chord structures, you know, like, you know, there's the Prince case, you know, and like how all that works, you know, like, so to me, this is a very real conversation of like just how copying is just, to me, it has this bad taste in the mouth. But like, would you call your kid writing something on a piece of paper that he saw on the board, would you call that like copyright infringement or plagiarism? I mean, kind of is, but it's not, because like that's how they're learning. They're not selling it to their Etsy shop. Like, you know, here's like, you know, maybe they are to their classmates to like, you know, with their homework or whatever, but I don't know.
I think your example, I was just going to say real quick, I think the example of the hip hop is such a unique and like on par example, because like so many beats rise and fall off of sampling content that people had to use, that had to create and had been used and reformatted for years and years. And I think that's just such a, I don't know, it's so interesting to think about the like it. I love the videos that come along on Reels or TikTok or whatever that talk about how someone sampled this to adjust, transform, create into their new hit. And that's I think as long as they're respectful and understand where the attribution of that content goes, like people are okay with that within the field, because that's the bread and butter of the genre. I don't know. I just think that's an interesting angle on it. So
yeah. I mean, it's the 50th year of hip hop, and so like a lot of that has been coming to light, now, and that people are afraid of the new. I think that is kind of the thing. They were afraid of hip hop, that it was all, it has a history wrapped in it that we don't have to go into that necessarily, but maybe there was afraid of that now, and now it's kind of been derivative to where it is today. And I think this, as people are afraid of the new thing, and I think that churches are always slow to adopt things because they don't want to. I mean, on juxtaposed to the previous conversation, in some ways they want to do the new logo that looks like something current, but then sometimes they're very slow to adopt because they think it's messing with who they are. And I think that, like, example, the other day, I used 11 Labs to take our executive director treasurer, and I wrote down something that he would say in 11 Labs, and I showed it to everybody, and they're like, "Yeah, and what's your point?" And like, well, this isn't our executive director treasurer. This is 11 Labs, and they're like, "What is going on?" And there's there's automatically that, like, whoa, this is scary. We're all going to replace everything like that, yeah, you're right. Churches need to look out for stuff like that and be aware, because if you're a pastor, if you're a leader, ministry leader, if you're knowing that people's voices could be replicated, either you're going to be accused potentially maybe down the road of saying something you didn't, or somebody really said something that they didn't, and they're just going to say, well, that's not me, that's AI, right? So I think that's where we have some educational pieces to our churches and leaders in that community, and that about it, that where that it's the hubris of like wanting to just know everything is when we don't know anything, it creates unease to that. And that's why I just go back to that verse, behold, for I have made all, do not be afraid, for behold, I make all things new, because that's kind of the essence of everything wrapped together. Don't be afraid, because I'm the one who's making something new. So, anyways.
In 11 Labs being a generative AI text to speech and voice cloning tool. FYI, for those who don't know. Yeah. Nick, I know you had something that you wanted to say. I can tell Caleb's mind's wheels are moving, but Nick, you go ahead first.
I was going to say, to Caleb's earlier point, we might have missed what Caleb was saying there. I don't think it was more of like Nick is creating his own Banksy inspired stuff. Caleb, you were saying like,
Nixie.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying that. But you're saying like I'm taking Banksy's work and one-to-one reproduction of it, which I think another way to look at that would be a cover band. So like a Beatles cover band, right? We don't go to a Beatles cover band because we want to hear it new. We want to hear the Beatles, but that doesn't exist so much anymore. So in that regard, it is a trying to be as sincere of a one-to-one copy, and we would consider that art. Not wrong.
So I my point actually goes along really well with that. So the Alex was talking previously about in the world of hip hop, that the idea of like sampling is like bread and butter foundational to the genre of hip hop, and that all of the sounds that you're hearing now, well, not all of them, but many of them are from like old records that came out 5 decades ago and have been like kind of restrewn and everything. It's amazing to go look at like the sample breakdowns of some of the songs that Kanye West is a master at it. He's crazy now, but he's also very good at it.
Agreed on both points. Agreed on both points.
Second time we've talked about.
Yeah, this is Kanye 2 weeks in a row.
Listen, I'm still mourning the loss of my boy.
I know.
Right there.
So this idea of like copying and like twisting around and making something new out of it is very foundational. And also, like Alex said, the idea of copying, like covering wholesale, hip hop covers are not a thing. You will never find a hip hop artist that's just like, I'm gonna do his song at my show. That never happens. That is like very much like biting. It's built into the culture of the MC. This is stuff they wrote, and the idea of like that is just about as bad as you get, to the point of where like some rappers will be paranoid about it. I know like MF Doom is someone who is like every rapper's favorite rapper, and his rhymes and his schemes get stuck in people's head, and they're concerned about accidentally copying other rappers, and that's a whole thing. Now, so I'll put all that right there. Now in the world of rock, the idea of covering a song is relatively mainstay, and a lot of the concerts you go to, it's not uncommon to have even like well-known famous artists be like, okay, we're just going to do their song and we're going to put our band's twist on it. And that's a very normal, very like culturally understood thing to do. That being said,
that was like the bread and butter of our local music scene. Right. Like they would play two of their songs, but mashed in between two really popular emo songs that would absolutely get the crowd engaged.
And that's what got
something like. You even look at something like Punk Goes Pop, which is an entire, like multiple albums where it's like it's post-hardcore and alternative like versions of taking music that was already covered, but then making new content from it, which some artists honestly have found their mainstream awareness because of it, and they don't even get to hear the band's original content until the person finds them through the cover.
Yeah, and that's what actually got Ed Sheeran, and that's how he was discovered. He was doing a cover of "Let's Get It On," and that's what started this whole mess. So sorry, interrupted you.
No, yeah, but I think the interesting point is the idea in rock music of like, oh, I really loved the guitar solo from Black Sabbath's whatever, blah 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 blah. I'm gonna grab that and put in my song. That would not be okay. The idea of like biting a part of a song and inserting into your, like effectively sampling, that would not be okay in that world. And I think this is sort of a fascinating example of the ethics of copying are like context specific, right? It's a moral relativism, so to say. I know that's a scary thing to say in the world of like replicative art. And I think the concern of AI is it doesn't have any of those contexts, and all of us individually have our own understanding and our own worldview of what is okay copying. Some people might okay with the Nixie complete replication.
Yes, it's catching on.
Right? Is this the new social thing?
Some might be totally fine with it, right? And I think the scariest thing is like all you're doing is making it so much easier for people who are bad actors to take advantage of that, to not only make themselves money, but to decrease the value of somebody else's work, right, is sort of the big concern. So I think all that to say, I legitimately and completely, totally understand the concerns that people have, the fears surrounding it. Do I feel like, to some extent, too bad, suck it up, we're going this way anyway, and there's nothing you can do about it? Yeah, also that, right? But I do think there's something to be said about like the ethics of copying, that it's not black and white. It's very much gray. It's very much culture and context dependent. And we're never going to come to a single answer that we all agree on for every scenario.
Yeah, I mean, I think if we're gonna, if you don't mind, I think if we're gonna talk about the fears surrounding AI, we can't also miss. I mean, it sounds like copying, the ethical implications of that copying and remixing. We can't also miss the fear of losing jobs, losing livelihoods, losing, losing experience. So I want to make sure that we don't also miss that fear. I want to advocate for the person who's anti-AI to help bridge that extra element that we haven't touched on yet, which is, are people's jobs, livelihoods, experiences being taken away because of this tool? And you could say that same thing about probably a lot of technology over the years. There are a lot of jobs that no longer exist because technology replaced them. However, there were new jobs and roles that were needed as a result of the technological advancement. So just want to touch on that fear so they don't miss that before we move on to kind of some of the more what should we do about it elements.
Yeah, I think what's interesting about that specific component is that, art has always been getting cheaper faster since the printing press. And the printing press supplanted the monks who literally were copying on parchment the Bible. So the Bible moved forward faster, and the Reformation got, catapulted into existence through the printing press. But in the process, it replaced the monks who were painstakingly by hand with a quill and parchment, writing every single word. So yes, their jobs got replaced for sure, but it from that spurred on the Reformation through this new technology. And so I think the question is not, will it replace jobs? Well, will it replace the people who do not incorporate it into their workflow? Because we've been using lots of different things, Photoshop, like, you know, like it goes on, you know, Canva, you know, and Squarespace, you know, I'm not going to hire a designer to do. So it's a race to the bottom of who can be the cheapest per se, or it's I'm going to find my specific niche, or I'm going to be the luxury version of this to have that. So those are that's just kind of all walks of life, I guess.
Yeah. I know I've used this example on the show before, but I remember seeing an extremely old comic of a couple of horses talking in like 1905, and they were looking at like the Model A driving by, and one horse says, you know, this is going to make our jobs so much easier, you know, blah, 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 blah. The other horse said, like, you know, but like if everybody gets cars, like, what are we going to do? And the other horse says back, oh, don't worry, they'll find other better jobs for us. Right. And then the population of horses over the past 100 years has shrunk down to like 10% of what it used to be, because we don't need them anymore. Right. So is this going to kill jobs? 100%, $1,000,000%. It's going to kill jobs. Even, I mean, I can talk about it a little bit now. I'm running a Dungeons and Dragons campaign that is very extremely involved, doing a lot of extra stuff and animating bits and pieces. All of the art of it was AI generated, heavily edited by myself in Photoshop and all that.
Caleb, how could you?
Yeah, I know. I did a ton of work to get it to be exactly, because everybody was very particular about what their character portraits look like.
Yes, I was.
You know, but that could have been work that I was paying an illustrator to do. Hundreds of dollars. No, for the amount of art I needed, thousands of dollars. It really realistically would have been. That's a job that evaporated. Now, it's a thing that wouldn't have happened because I don't have the budget to pay someone thousands of dollars to do that, right? But I do think if you are an artist in the field, if you're a creator in the field, and right now we're talking about illustration, but you better believe it's coming for video. It's coming for design. As we saw in the Adobe Max, they're already starting to make text to template to make like Photoshop like flyers and stuff out of text prompts, right? If there are a couple different ways to survive, but the main one primarily is going to be get good at the tools. The tools will still be a barrier of entry for people. Some executive at the big company is not going to want to figure out how to do prompt generation to get him a logo that he likes. He's still going to want to hire somebody, right? So you got to figure out, in the same way, like if you were a monk painstakingly write down the Bible, it's time to figure out how to work a printing press, right? Like if you, unless you're willing to change fields, incorporate it or die. I know that's a harsh way to put it, but I think that's sort of the reality.
The problem I see with that is that, like, let's take the monks for example. There were, I'm going to say dozens or probably more, you know, dozens of monks working towards the same goal. And one printing press probably was operated by, let's say, 3 people. So we go from 24 individuals to 3. You know, there's 21 individuals who now don't have work. And, you know, I heard it said somewhere, and I think it's very true. AI is not going to take your job. It's going to, what's going to take your job is the person who knows how to leverage it.
Correct.
Right.
And the scarcity is going to be, can you get to that finish line first? And I can imagine it's a bit of a scary thing to say, but I think it's true, is if people aren't working to learn and understand these tools, the people that are doing it now while you're not are going to be the ones that keep their jobs.
I do want to add one small thing in there that's sort of worth noting. When the Bible specifically was being replicated by only people who were writing it by hand, the only people who had Bibles were very rich people. Right. After the printing press was developed, yes, it took less people to make every Bible, but all of a sudden the cost of the Bible shrunk so much.
Correct.
That everybody could get it. There was, because the economy of scale, right? As the price went down, it became more accessible to everybody. Now more Bibles are needed. You need more people to make the stuff, right? So I think it's going to be a shift, even with the people who are incorporating AI. You'll have to move at a pace faster because the value of what you're making has technically shrunk, which means you'll need to make more of it. But because the value has shrunk, there may be more people who are now willing to spend this amount of dollars on what used to cost this amount of dollars on whatever product it is that you're creating.
And it also creates opportunities for other people to their voices. I was telling people like today, like we got these little pop mics, right? The $40, $50 pop mics, Sennheiser EW500, a couple years back, that's like $600. So it's going to create more opportunities for people to have that, to share their voice. We have this little magazine, this ministry plan that we put out of all the stories of our churches. And we have a gal here that is in a closed country that we can't show her face. So we describe to Midjourney what she looks like. And now people can visualize what this person looks like so they can see that. And now we have her. So let's say she leads somebody to the Lord. We can now create that. It's no more of a visual representation than the visual representation that people have of Jesus, be right, wrong, or indifferent, that, that helps you visually understand the story a little bit better. I'm a foster kid. As a kid, I could never get photographed. But if we wanted to tell a story of me now, I could create a Alex character. And now we could tell that story in a visual perspective. And, like when you read a book, it may not be what you look like in your head, but now you have a visual jump off point to be able to do that. So there's ways to use AI ethically. And, we say in the beginning of the book, portions of the stories, portions of the photos, were utilized to, using AI. We use AP as our writing style, and AP has now gone on record since August saying that they do not use AI tools, period, because they think that it kind of affects journalistic integrity. And so we are kind of like, well, we use AP for our style, but they say that they don't use AI. We want to use AI ethically. How do we bridge those gaps? And so I think that's where, not to say that it is a gray area, but it is, there is some relativism in that, how you do that. So to us, we're telling the stories accurately, and in a, by being forthright and saying what we're doing and crediting, but we're not saying like this photo was, was edited in Photoshop and it's, like this is not how blue this water was, like we made it bluer, like we're not saying that, we have adjusted color saturation. And so I think the generative AI component is the differentiation that people have to understand. AI has been utilized for years without you even know it. Siri, all of that, but the generative AI that you're making something new and different, that it's always going to need some kind of prompt or something. And so it will never fully replace. Yes, the monks will go away, but there will be somebody that will need to understand and press the button or give the new idea. Yesterday, it's dating the podcast, but yesterday OpenAI had their little conference, and it's now up to April 2023. So now it's indexing that much of the internet, but now it's not going to be able, someday it may be current, but somebody has to continually come up with that content or it's going to, be in on itself. So I think humans who are the Imago Dei, I might be preaching a little bit, so I apologize about that, but it's no different than people who love their pets, right? And that's okay. But but a human is made in the Imago Dei, in the image of God. That if you love technology and you're leveraging it, I think that that's okay. But understanding that still humans are the image bearers of God as the Imago Dei, and there is a distinction from that separation, and that it's a tool that we could utilize in that capacity. And it may have some fallout for people along the way, but that's just kind of how technology advances. There's always going to be fallout of something along the way. And so I think churches have a fear of it just because that if they don't fully understand it, that's where they kind of get a little intimidated. And so I'm just appreciative that you guys are doing what you're doing to help educate churches and ministers and those who are watching this, just to be able to talk to your pastor, very talk to your pastor, or you are the pastor, and just kind of think through, like, where are some things that we want to say hard line, no, we're not going to use AI in this way. We're not going to write our sermon by typing in, write me a sermon in the chat GPT,
Right.
and just spitting it out. Like, there needs to be some kind of human check at the end of the line. Don't just let it go to town. But maybe, oh, hey, it's okay, I'm going to do a sermon series on this subject, and it's a very vague subject. I don't know, come up with a graphic that could be something like this. And, then catapulting from that. So I think those guidelines that each church would have would be able to just be helpful in consulting that knowledge. So if you have things in the comments or in the chat or all that, we'd love to hear how you could be able to, how is your church using AI? What are maybe some questions you have about that? That'd be great, because I just appreciate Blackbar. You guys are trying to continually help people, and that this, help this change that is happening. So I just appreciate y'all.
Yeah. Thanks for thinking that way, man. I appreciate that. To continue that thread, if we can, again, I'm trying to just think from the perspective of someone who is still having a hard time coming along this. I think the most tangible questions to get to where you're arriving to, Alex, is what should we do about it? What does a framework or guideline look like for using AI ethically within church and ministries? I feel like that, getting practically into that, might help bridge the gap between someone who is still on the fence about leveraging technologies. Because you guys have kind of said, it's happening, get on board or get left behind. And that's a hard thing for someone to feel, especially if they consider themselves an artist in a traditional medium. So what do you guys think the next steps are? What does it look like to develop a guideline for your community?
I think to some extent, like I said earlier, this is a world of gray, and the lines you draw are to some extent going to be your own. That being said, personally, I think where I would draw the line is transparency. When you do use AI for the time being, until maybe something changes in the future, but you gotta tell people, like, it's gotta be where it could be the finest fine print at the bottom, whatever. But even, like, I know the specific example that Alex brought up of the missionary in the third world country that's a restricted area. I know we had a conversation about that specifically, but that was still sort of in progress. And
Alex, we kept your name out of it and the location. So now that you've officially come out of it, it's
but the I think transparency is like, you could use the AI generated image if they know it's an AI generated image, and then I don't think people can make their own decisions. But I think no one will have an issue about that if they don't feel like they've been fooled, if they don't feel like they've been taken advantage of. And so we don't need more churches lying to people. That's fine. Anyway, for me, that would be sort of my first big line in the sand when you're using it. Just
transparency.
In a culture that is distrusting, the currency is trust. And if it's gained quickly, it's gained slowly and lost quickly. And so to be transparent, to build trust, you need to be transparent in that. So the currency of AI is trust, and transparency, I think, is a good generalized statement. As far as a specific statement, and I mean, we're the South Carolina Baptist Convention, and we have some of our annual meetings. In our annual meeting, we do like these resolutions, which are kind of these statements. And I don't want to talk about all the statements that are happening, but specifically the Southern Baptist Convention is the first religious institution to make a actual ethical statement on the use of AI. So you can look that up, and it has a lot of whereas, thus for, whereas, etc. Sure. So I don't want to read the whole thing, but it basically says humans are humans, and God is God, and God uses many things to propel his work forward. And so we want to make sure that we maximize the efficiency we can, not at the expense of others, but to consider the propelling of the gospel forward. I mean, that's kind of what it says in a nutshell. It has a lot more legalese and et cetera, and whereas and thus fors. But like, to me, if you took that document and now from that wrote some kind of statement, like when we are in a big busy season, but once we come out of that, we're going to write something that is in more like practical terms coming out of this statement that we can utilize to help our churches as that statement. Just like churches are wanting a statement about certain various other cultural things, they want some kind of thing that they can pull from. We hopefully that we can have that as a thing to again, humans are humans and they're made by a creative God. Humans are made in the imago Dei. He has used technology throughout history to propel the church forward. And so we're going to use it with these guardrails in this capacity. Right. So, so that's what I would say as far as like a brass tacks right now, kind of like a framework or guideline and that's new as of like June. So by the time this podcast, who knows, maybe there's some other churches. I don't know. I mean, do you guys know of any other churches that like have like a guard rise? This is how we use AI. This is not how we, and that's just fascinating to me that like, I mean, I came out of the assemblies like y'all, are in the, have assemblies history, like, so that I wouldn't have expected that a more mainline denomination like us as Baptists would be one of the people on the forefront of that. So I'm kind of excited that we're being able to do that in a way, and be able to have that, and just seeing where the other denominations can like start to build that as well, so that we can see those kind of guardrails come into play. So, I mean, that would be a good thing to see. Just look up SBC resolution on artificial intelligence, and that can give you a kind of a guidepost of guideline of how you're kind of going through and building out that framework for those funnels. But transparency, and then if you have a policy, how you use it and how you don't use it. And I think that general, some churches have super lot of policies, some churches have it in somebody's head. So anyways.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
I'm curious. I do a lot of work. Nick and I both do a lot of work with the National Office for the Assembly specifically. And it does make me wonder if hopefully someone down there is thinking about this and trying to figure out a way to sort of rationalize their beliefs with this very new, very, very disruptive technology, whether they realize it or not.
So if we're practically ending this conversation, because we're starting to get to the end, what do you think you guys would do if you got to sit down? It sounds like sitting down and developing and establishing a clear framework is one of the most important things. And a large element of that is transparency. If you guys were encouraging our community to figure out how to have that conversation, what other elements do you think are necessary? Because it feels like just sitting down and talking is important, because clarity leads to unity. So having an initial conversation of clarity, get on the same page, is a baseline. Making sure your lead pastor, making sure your executive board has an understanding, is on the same page as you about the technology you're using. These are conversations we had when COVID hit. Does your pastor and pastoral staff have an idea of where you're going together toward technology? So that feels like the biggest umbrella. An element of that seems like transparency. What other elements do you think are necessary offhand that you guys would recommend?
I feel like there's something that we need that might be for the individual that's worth looking at. I think about, in my world of video editing, there's a lot of tools that already exist and have existed for some time that probably don't make much sense anymore. In terms of why they're called what they called, right? Like the slip tool, or like even the blade tool, right? In a modern nonlinear editor, where it's you're splitting a clip or something like that, right? And what this relates to AI is, I feel like when that ceiling increases for people's skill, right? What the responsible thing to do to make sure that you're also getting the context that's necessary to understand, not fall into the trap that we talked about before with Comic Sans, right? Where like all of a sudden you don't know how to necessarily use it correctly, is to learn the history behind it. So like understanding that the reason the blade tool exists is because when you actually had real film, you had to literally cut the thing and glue it together, right? Like that may not necessarily have that may not have an immediate implication of how you edit, but I think it has a greater implication of your understanding of the tool, how it is used, and why you would use it. And hopefully that would translate to like how you would use AI. So like as a person not a graphic designer, hopefully I can understand design elements. So when I do use AI to design, I'm not doing it in a irresponsible or, as Caleb, you've mentioned, a derivative way.
Right.
Yeah, you have to know the rules to break the rules. And surprisingly, Gen Z, the save icon is a actual floppy disk that.
Yes,
sorry.
Great point. Yeah. No, well, I mean, yeah.
I never thought that's still what that is. They definitely would not know what that is.
They have no context for that.
No. I think another thing specifically, obviously this is really only going to apply in the church world, but like I can remember this was before my time at Grand Rapids First. There was a IT guy that worked there that has not worked there for many years. And I don't even know his name because he left before I got there. That whenever there was a problem with any of the computers, he would walk over to it, ask what was wrong, whatever, and then he would pray over it for like 3 or 4 minutes. And if that didn't work, he would then go and try to fix it. I don't know the success rate of praying over the machine prior to actually, opening up a command prompt or anything like that. But I do think there's something to be said about a danger of the intentionality of waiting on the inspiration of God when the inspiration of AI can come like that. In terms of idea generation, in terms of content generation, when it gets so much faster, and easier. Certainly, we could look at biblical parables about how difficult it is for a rich man to get into heaven, and I think a large part of that is because their dependency on God has just decreased to the point where like they don't need Him for all of those, various. They don't need to worry about the food on their table, all that kind of stuff. If we also do not need to worry about our source of inspiration because we know AI is going to give us an idea just like that, there is absolutely a concern that we will become less reliant, we'll be less plugged in and tuned in to what God has to say to us and to the people around us through us, right? So I think this is less of a policy and more of just like a note to keep in mind as you're using AI in general, that still ensure as Christians, as churches working in the world of ministry, that you are saying whatever it is that God is telling you to communicate and not whatever just the best idea AI has. I'm not saying that God can't communicate through the prompts AI gives you. I'm not saying that at all. But you need to be doing both and to ensure that what you are getting is something God is pushing you towards and not just whatever you think is the coolest at the time. So that would be something that I would definitely be intentional about as you're using it.
I feel that's the difference between being a lazy designer, letting the tool do all the work, and using the tool to create the work.
For sure.
Yeah, I think that you're not create just a prompt thing, like everybody's like, well, what's the coolest prompt, or what's the prompt? Here's the top 5 prompt tips or whatever. You still need to prompt it. There still needs to be something that comes from outside of the whole system to be able to think. So like if you want to preach on Romans, you still had to come up with the idea that you wanted to preach on Romans. So like, it's not going to just say, I mean, it could like randomly tell you what to preach on, but you still had to use the tool to say, here randomly, should I preach on? So to me, that's like where it is like that Pandora's box of like never ending. Like there always has to be some kind of like human element attached to that. And just understanding that for now until Hell 9000 takes over and all that. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Nixie. I can't do that, Nixie. I'm sorry.
I'm just gonna create an Instagram account called Nixie and just
beautiful.
I don't know. Yeah,
amazing.
Have AI do it.
There you go.
There we go. That's what
AI
it's gotta
generated
be.
Banksy art.
Yep.
So just to kind of like recap, please feel free to add on if I missed it as we land the conversation. Our kind of advice as we in developing a framework about how you can approach AI is to prioritize and establish an intentional AI approach policy with your leadership. Prioritize transparency in your use of the tools. Understand the value of your tools, both present, past, and future. Allow your marketing, creativity, your mission, and value to be the driving source of all that you're creating. And then finally, center your creativity on God. So regardless of the tools you're using, don't lose sight of the reason you're creating in the first place. Does that feel like a pretty good recap, guys? Am I missing anything?
That's good. I think it's good.
No, I feel you got it.
All right. Well, Alex, thank you so much for joining us today. It was a lot of fun. Hopefully, we didn't get into too many heresies or anything like that. I love the conversation.
No, I think we're great,
where
man.
we got to go. So, Caleb, if you want to take us home, this will be the end of today's episode.
Yeah. If you've watched today's video and you like what you see, please sure to like and to comment and subscribe and do all the things you do at the end of YouTube videos in general.
Yep.
If you'd like to continue on with this conversation or any other conversation related to church media, make sure to hit us up on the Discord at discord.blk.bar. And once again, if you want us specifically to help you with anything in the world of church media and church productions, you can find us at blk.bar.
Don't forget to follow Nixie on Instagram.
Yeah,
it's not happening, guys. It's not
I'm gonna have to change your little lower third here to be Nixie for next week.
Nope. Do not do that.
Thank you, Alex, for joining us once again, and we will see you all next week.